Thanks for joining us. This is The Week Ahead and my name is Ibrahim Sani from the AWANI newsroom.
And I'm Hafiz Marzukhi from the AWANI studio.
So next week, of course, is Hari Raya, but that doesn't mean that the week is going to slow down. In fact, there's plenty that is happening soon.
That's right, Ibrahim, and we will start off with our first agenda, which is the announcement of the first quarter GDP for 2021.
That's right. So the first story that we have for you right now is that Malaysia is expected to announce the first quarter GDP for this year on May 11th. The first 3 months of this year shows mixed economic activity since the issue of an MCO of any kind of variety was very much the feature of the first quarter. So what is to be expected from the GDP results, Hafiz?
Well, that's the big question, right? According to the Socio-Economic Research Centre Executive Director Lee Heng-Gee, the latest movement control order, or what is called as MCO 3.0, imposed by the government, will continue to have scarring effects on economic and business activities, and I'm sure it is not a big surprise. And speaking at a webinar last week, Lee said that the research centre expects the growth of Malaysia's gross domestic product, or GDP, to be at only 4%, which is much lower than Bank Negara Malaysia's or BNM's projection of 6% to 7.5%. And this is, of course, due to the slow pace of the vaccination program and the rising COVID-19 cases in the country, which we are facing as of now, Ibrahim. And to tell you the truth, with the announcement being made just days before the Hari Raya, I do hope there's a little bit of optimism in there, no matter how little that may be.
That's right. One of the things that we have to understand completely is based on the statement that Lee Heng-Gee made. It was more of the lower consumer demand, lower ability for people to spend. Hafiz, normally, as we all know, Raya is a time for domestic spending to surge. Folks at places or thoroughfares like Jalan Masjid India, shopping around at Kamda, that has to happen, but it didn't. In fact, if it did happen, something else is going to rise, which is the COVID cases. So therefore, everyone is very much alerted to the idea that shopping may have been reduced. Now, this has a knock-on effect to the traders out there, particularly day traders. They might not be able to sell as much as they would normally, and this is a second year in a row. So I'm surprised, actually, Hafiz, when Bank Negara projected at 6-something% to 7-something%. I think a more modest approach of 4% is going to be expected. But of course, things like this, we have to understand that everything is fluctuating and we don't know the real impact of the entire year, but at least the first quarter is going to be able to give a sneak peek or sneak preview into how this entire year will shape up.
Yes, Ibrahim, if you look at how the way is going, right, I think we've expected it in a way. But I remember last year, there's a similar optimism in terms of people back in 2020. I'm sure a year ago, I would have said things will get better in 2021. And right now, I'm not the Hafiz in 2021 is not too certain about it. And of course, we will always remain optimistic. We will always say that, oh, next year is going to be better. But the reality is, Ibrahim, can we really expect things to be better in 2022, despite all talks about vaccination, coming up, ramping up, etc., etc. But don't you think that businesses
it's not going to be easy? You think about it this way, right? So as ERC highlighted, that domestic demand is recovering as consumption boosters and EPF withdrawals is rising. Cash handouts as well as drawdowns of savings that were unspent during the pandemic is helping to revive discretionary consumer spending. But at the same time, savings in general has gone down and at a time when people do need to dip into their savings. So it's all dire economic outlook on this. We've covered this on this channel, Astro AWANI, by our colleagues doing Cerita, for instance, where traders in Kelantan, traders in Kedah are going through as much economic hardship as possible. And they say, quote unquote, one of the traders in Kelantan that I heard prior to doing this show, that they are being figuratively killed, not by the COVID, but by the lockdowns or by the MCO of some kind of variation. But this is the challenge that the regular person has to go through. If you don't allow for MCO to take place, then cases will surge. But at the same time, if you do impose upon an MCO, then the businesses will suffer quite literally. And this is no amount of digital or digitization can take place in these parts of Malaysia So I don't know whether we're going to see, I guess, a happy ending towards this whole story. It's going to be a tough one, at least for the first quarter. The second quarter, we started off okay for April, but May, it comes about as a kind of a expected shock, if I can use the word. It's a opposite terms, but the shock is kind of expected. May 5th was kind of an idea where we're going to see an MCO reinstituted, at least in Klang Valley and some places in JB. But yeah, that's how it is.
I guess it's all going to depend on the vaccination program, which actually we're going to discuss shortly. But before that, of course, Ibrahim, as usual, we will go through our weekly AGM run-throughs. And of course, despite this being a Raya week, actually, I'm quite surprised to hear that there are companies who are holding AGMs. One of them is, of course, the Tenaga Nasional Berhad, which has scheduled the AGM tomorrow, actually, 10th of May. And I think it's quite interesting because I think if you look at last year's AGM, or rather their 2019 performance, they've done really well. And in fact, it's probably one of the best performance in their history in terms of dividend payout. And of course, it's very interesting to look at Tenaga Nasional Berhad this year because we would like to see how it impacted their 2020 performance. And other than that, of course, they have already outlined plans to be the top 10 utilities provider by 2025. And of course, this was set way back in 2016, which is, I guess, people haven't even thought of facing a pandemic. But nevertheless, 2025 is only 4 years away. And I guess this will be one of the interesting things to look out.
Yeah, I think that on that point, Hafiz, I think this AGM is going to be a little bit more fiery than normal. If you think about it, remember April 2020 when the electric bill shot up, to a point where it went up 4 times, 5 times, in some cases 10 times. And there were a lot of public anger, myself included. I went on Twitter and I went on a rampage, showing the trending and all that. And of course, the issue is whether or not shareholders of Tenaga are going to raise hue and cry in this particular AGM. But even if the shareholders, slam their hands on the desk or, stand up in furor through Zoom calls or Skype calls or however they're going to do it this year, the CEO that was responsible for last year's business is no longer there. He is right now,
new leadership, right?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say, enjoying new life, but he might be enjoying a fresh new breath of air at EPF. So it's the management of a new kind of management that has to answer for the performance of the previous management. And I don't know whether that will sit well with many of them.
I guess we will keep an eye on that. Other than that, next day after 10th is, of course, a public bank is scheduled to do their AGM on the 11th. And of course, both of us have been keeping close eye on banks, Maybank, etc., etc. And it's always interesting to look at how banks perform, especially in the times of pandemic, right, Ibrahim?
That's right. So Public Bank comes on the back of Maybank. They have finally done their hiccup AGM, as we mentioned many times already. I don't know whether Maybank Corporate Com is going to be angry with me, but yeah, the idea here is that the AGMs that were done by CIMB went smoothly. Maybank had to do a take 2 on the AGM. The original one was slated sometime in April, and of course they had to redo it this week, and everything went smoothly. And all the other banks out there are also going through their paces in terms of doing the AGMs. But one thing we need to talk about is the increase of pay by bank executives, sometimes in the triple digits in terms of percentage from last year versus this year. So I don't know whether that is going to be a point of contention, particularly when it comes to banks like Public Bank, where it is an owner-driven bank. Yes. And at the same time, I don't know whether they can argue based on performance. As we all know, Public Bank has been strong on cost-to-income ratio compared to other banks. But at the same time, the CI ratio for Public Bank has been creeping up slowly, largely because the fact that they can't digitize their performance fast enough. So I don't know whether these issues will be brought up in the AGMs that are coming in one day before Raya. But having said that, our colleague Hafiz, Rizal Zulkapli, interviewed Jalil Rashid, the Berjaya Group CEO. This is the first time Jalil has appeared on a mainstream media, not just wearing the hat as the Group CEO of Berjaya Group, but since he was sacked, or I suppose since he was removed from PNB 2 years ago. So this is a snippet of the conversation that we have had, or Astro AWANI has had, with Jalil Rashid. Take a look.
Collection of various businesses, and I guess in the past, somewhat the resistance towards Berjaya was that we had so many businesses. It was very unclear for shareholders to kind of ascertain what is Berjaya. Or are you a consumer company? Are you an industrial company? What are you, right? Which is why earlier I said it's important to get the definition right and to really put ourselves there as a consumer group. And what this would mean is that investors getting into Berjaya will have a clear exposure to consumer-related businesses. And those businesses will be organized along clear verticals, be it hospitality or retail or food or whatever other verticals that we have. So it is really to be really very focused to say, hey, these are the subsectors that we want to be in. And if we ever were to grow, it will be within these subsectors. So it's very clear from a definition perspective. So we're giving that clarity to our shareholders so that they can then evaluate and decide whether the company is heading in the right direction.
So as you can see, Hafiz, there's a lot of conversation that needs to be had with Berjaya Group, and we've always been supportive of Jalil. In fact, I was the first to interview him on the mainstream media here on Astro AWANI back in 2017, if you think about that. And it's been renowned. The market understands that Jalil is a very good communicator. He is clear in his vision. He is clear in his ideas. And most importantly, he is deliberate in all his actions. And we all know that for every single organization that he goes to, it is the first question that he tries to answer. What is the company all about? What does the company stand for? And what does the company intend to do for themselves before they want to address their customers? Because one thing that I remembered when we interviewed Jalil at PNB, at our makeshift studio at WTC, the question of what does PNB do when it comes to their workers, that was a big question mark, A lot of people inside PNB have various answers to what PNB is supposed to do. So if you think about that, and by the way, the answers coming from the staff, they're not all wrong, but it means like they have so many objectives, not many of them know what they're supposed to do. And that's when I understand that when we spoke about this with Jalil, Rizal at least, I spoke to him, the first thing that he intends to do is to be clear on what Berjaya is supposed to do and the definition of the business outright. So in the next week or in the weeks to come, we're going to see a lot more clarity coming in from Berjaya Group. And it is important because Berjaya does touch a lot of consumer businesses, anywhere from 7-Eleven to 7E, to Starbucks, pardon me, and all the other stuff in between. They are going to have a very tough conversation into how they define themselves. And remember, some of the businesses are going through the toughest time possible. Berjaya is big on hospitality, on tourism, and that has taken a dip, to say, to put it mildly. But the fact that they can define themselves better, I think it's good.
I think it's very interesting because if you look at Jalil, I guess he is someone who I would describe as a rock star CEO of sorts. You can see how he performs even in clubhouse sessions, if they are still relevant right now.
They are.
Hundreds and thousands of people are actually listening to what he has to say, and it's very interesting to stay true and keep a close eye on what he's actually talking about and what he brings to the table. And of course, he is the first non-family member to actually helm Berjaya. So there must be something special there for the owners to actually
corporate governance, right? I think Berjaya, if it's anything lacking, it's corporate governance. In fact, Berjaya has been trading at a discount for the longest of time, and one of the things that Jalil wants to do is to improve on the market perception towards Berjaya and try to bring some form of premium towards the company. But the only way analysts and investors can see that is through that argument of can the company improve themselves when it comes to corporate governance. So taking family members out of the equation and taking a professional CEO coming in and to run the business professionally, institute very strong structural governance and corporate governance controls. I think that's the only way forward. So I think I'm more excited than ever to look at what Berjaya can do in the weeks to come. So hopefully some interesting news will be announced in next week. But I don't know whether that will be done because it's still Hari Raya, you know.
Yeah, and very interesting that you brought up these topics, Ibrahim, and it is therefore essential for all of us to think how we remain productive. And in fact, talking about productivity last week, we at AWANI actually spoke to Mark Wu, who is the Managing Director of Google Malaysia, on this very issue. And there's a scheme by google.org.
Yeah, that scheme is quite interesting. In fact, it was me that was interviewing Mark Wu. The scheme by google.org was talking about several grants to help further drive economic recovery, specifically among the underserved communities. Mark Wu shared with us some of the ideas of what this grant is all about, and perhaps we can learn more from it. Just take a look into what was said.
I would love to, Ibrahim. Thanks for bringing that up. So, through our philanthropic arm, google.org, we provided close to 14 million ringgit in funding, particularly to the Asia Foundation, to help the underserved communities. So women-led, small and micro businesses, people with disabilities, unemployed youth, to essentially gain better digital literacy skills. So the modules include creating online profiles on professional network platforms, getting better at doing business on digital platforms, as well as maximizing their employability. We also provided additional grants to Youth Business International with exactly the same intentions.
So as you can see, there's a lot of items that can be done with micro SMEs, small and medium-sized enterprises as well. And here at Astro AWANI, we have a product called Jiwa SME. I urge you guys to find out more about that. That's where we help micro entrepreneurs and SMEs try to be a little bit more productive, particularly at a time when MCO is all about right now, and we don't know how to be using tools, particularly free tools that are available on us to make our businesses a bit more digital. And those are the kind of items that maybe you want to look at. Now, if we have more information, we'll share it with you accordingly. But right now, GWSM is the place to go for you to learn more about how to be productive for your businesses.
Also, so always keep an eye on what's going on with that. We're going to take a short break. We're going to continue our conversation right after this.
This is a week ahead. Thanks again for joining us.
As mentioned, next week, Ibrahim, is definitely Hari Raya, so one could reasonably expect the vaccinations to slow down. However, I guess the issue of slowing down vaccinations have certainly garnered the eye of the coordinating minister for the national COVID-19 immunization program, Khairy Jamaluddin. In fact, before we extend our conversation further, I think let's hear what he has to say on actually why this thing is going on.
Sure.
No, of course, as a developing country, we are extremely dissatisfied with the distribution of vaccines around the world. I think this has been a matter that has been highlighted not just by developing countries, but a concern that has been voiced by Secretary General Gutierrez, by the Director General of the WHO, Dr. Tedros, saying that the rollout of vaccines or supply of vaccines as far as the first half of 2021 is concerned is completely inequitable and frankly unethical. You can see a country like Malaysia where it is not because of the efficiency of our vaccination program. We turned this around in 48 hours. We gave appointments to 260,000 people in one day. So it's not that we can't do it fast, but it's the supply of vaccines that are slow. Why are the supply of vaccines slow? Simply because pharmaceutical companies prioritize rich countries and give deals to rich countries which were not on offer to developing countries. So that's, I think, something that the international community will have to continue to discuss not just in terms of managing COVID-19, but in terms of future pandemic management. How these much needed, much sought after vaccines have essentially been monopolized by Western countries. So I believe that this is a topic for a larger conversation. I'm not pushing blame on anybody, but I'm just trying to manage expectations here in Malaysia, because people want the vaccines here. They tell me all the time, I said, when is my term for the vaccines? It's not that they are sitting in a freezer somewhere here in Kuala Lumpur. They haven't arrived yet. They arrive on a very gradual basis. Of course, this is set to change starting in June, July this year, because the rich countries have inoculated most of their citizens already. So it's like from a scene in Titanic where the guys in the low class are waiting for the lifeboats, and the guys in the rich upper cabins have gone off on the lifeboats already. That's what's happening.
I never thought the day that I could see Kyrie actually talks about Titanic.
No, exactly, right? I mean, the moment you have to use an analogy like the Titanic, it really brings about the clarity that is needed. Hafiz, I got a few graphics I want to share with you. If you can just pull up this particular graphic that talks about the new COVID-19 cases rising, and here we have individuals that have received their first and second doses of COVID-19 vaccinations in Malaysia. You know, we're barely past that 1 million number, and we're looking at 20,000 individuals being inoculated daily. And folks like me and you, Hafiz, we're still going to be, vaccinated, sometime this month. Mine is 31st of May. It's just going to be a slow one, right? So if you look at this graph and you compare to the next graph, let's pull up the next graph. The next graph talks about how the COVID-19 cases have been rising rapidly in the past month. And as you can see, the first peak was when we saw the MCO 2.0 announced. And then it was released. And then everything dipped, and then MCO no more, and then the cases started rising again. Now that line is not finished. The second uptick, that line is not finished. It's going to continue to rise until we have had all that 2 to 3 weeks incubation period back to be reported. So we've had numerous cases of beds not being enough, ICU cases that is breaking the system. It's really, really bad.
It's really scary, Ibrahim, because we at the back of looking at this graph, we are also looking at updates from all around the world, and we look at India as one of the countries who is basically decimated by COVID-19. But however, I would like to bring our attention to actually what Kyrie said in the what he said just now about not that the vaccines have arrived and it's in the freezer somewhere in KL. It basically hasn't arrived yet. So I think there's a bigger issue here, right? About vaccine equity, and it is important for us to actually understand that not the government doesn't want to vaccinate the people fast enough. The vaccines hasn't arrived. Yeah.
So we've known that the announcement of 1 million AstraZeneca vaccines are coming over. There's also a bunch of other vaccines coming over. So those are the kind of things that are happening. But I don't know whether the rate is going to increase. It's Raya. So already we have 20,000 daily, but that number might slow down. I'm speculating, and this is not news, but I'm speculating. A reasonable expectation is that those numbers will go down for at least 1 week, and that is a week lost. That's all I have to say.
Yes, definitely, Ibrahim. And I guess moving on to our final story, which is, the most interesting of all. UMNO celebrates the 75th Diamond Jubilee this week on May 11th, actually. And as you know, UMNO is one of the main players.
The GOP, Hafiz.
Yes.
GOP, Grand Old Party of Malaysia.
One of the main players in this political arena. What can we expect from this so-called celebration?
I think for this celebration, it's going to be low-key. We saw a statement coming in from the SecGen saying that, for all the UMNO members out there, go to social media, explain that, this is a very momentous period for their party members, and how this will resonate well for Malaysians in general. But this is the thing about UMNO today. If you're not a member, it's very hard for you to resonate well with that party. And that's why I think this 75th anniversary of theirs is a time for reflection, and is a time for them to really do a deep soul search into what they think is important for the rest of the people here, using their party as the vehicle to affect change. I think that's the most important thing that they can do right now, and perhaps all of us in Malaysia will be better served if all the political parties more aggressive and a little bit more participative in terms of the democratic debate. But until and unless we see parties being clear on what they want and what they stand for, I think it's going to be tricky for us to see a vibrant democracy moving forward for the country.
Of course, I totally agree with you, Ibrahim, on that. And I guess that is all we have for you on this edition of The Week Ahead. Get the latest news updates on COVID-19 and COVID-19 vaccines from astroawani.com and also the Astro Awani app. I'm Hafiz Marzukhi.
And I'm Ibrahim Sani signing off. And enjoy your Raya and stay safe, everyone.